who you want to be in this world. What is it that you're meant to be giving back to the universe?
A lot of times we try to please others and we lose track of what we can contribute the most.
Colette was certainly a person who lived a life without boundaries and wrote about a lot of that in her books. The paradoxes of great literature are those of human nature, and Colette is nothing if not human.
Very punk rock.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's talk about If I Ruled the World. My first question, don't you rule the world?
I find it very important to tell stories of unapologetic women who are living the lives that they devise for themselves.
Not living somebody else's life.
That is exactly correct.
Okay, so then the big question is, how did Colette change your life? Please welcome to the show, Amy DuBois Barnett. You have a fascinating story and background. Let's just kind of start at the beginning. Where did you grow up?
So I was born in Chicago, but I've had a very anomalous and peripatetic upbringing. So I have lived in 13 cities on 3 continents. I am from New York. That's where I spent most of my life. And that's also where I hit puberty. I feel like wherever you hit puberty is where you're from. Like those are your formative years. So I lived in New York for most of my life. But I lived in India. I lived in France. I lived across the United States. So I have a full perspective, on many different cities.
So born in Chicago, how old were you when you left Chicago?
I was 2 years old. I think my parents were doing their respective PhDs at the University of Chicago. And so I was born actually in the University of Chicago hospital. And then they took me with them to India when I was about, I guess maybe 4, now that I think about it, to do the end of their respective dissertation research. So that's why we were in India. And then when we came back, we went to Princeton, where they both became professors.
Do you have any siblings?
I have one half-sister, yes.
Older or younger?
She's younger.
Younger? So do you remember the moves? Do you remember going to India?
I remember, I have flashes of India because I was really young. But apparently at one point I spoke both Tamil and Hindi. I remember the house, we had a crow catcher in the back. So there would be a backyard. I would hang out with my ayah, which was like a nanny. And she would give me, coconut from this freezer that was on the ground. So she would cut me pieces of coconut and we'd go about in the backyard and we'd watch the crow catcher, slingshot rocks at crows to keep them away. So I have vague memories of elephants walking down the street. I don't know why. It wasn't a regular occurrence. I'm confident it must have been a parade of some sort. So it's flashes like that.
Well, what kind of kid were you?
I was athletic and bookish. I was very athletic, very active, but also very geeky. You know what I mean? Yeah. It took a lot of years. I was super cute when I was young. And then I had a really long, awkward stage, that had to do with braces and skin and not knowing what to do with my hair and many different things. And so during that period of time, my bookish side really kind of came to the fore.
Was it easy for you to adapt when you moved around so much? Was it easy for you to make friends?
Yes and no. You move around so much, you get used to being the new kid. Right, exactly, being the new kid. And, and what I figured out after a while, it took me a few moves, but I figured after a while that what it does mean is you get to be a new person if you want, so.
Oh, like a reinvention?
Right, exactly. So, whatever it is you want to leave behind in this place, if you're intentional about it, if you really want to have, be new, you know what I mean? Present yourself in a different way, you can. This is an opportunity to do so. But it took me several awkward moves to realize that.
And how old were you when you read your first book?
I started reading at a really young age. I think I was around 2.
Oh, wow.
I know. I wasn't like War and Peace, but I did start reading really young. And my mom told me that, I don't know, it was like a little party trick. They would like sit little me on like one of their laps and be like, here's a book, because they were in academia. So they can be excused for this very wonky kind of party trick, but they would put a little book in front of me and I would be like, here's that, This is what they've told me. I can't speak to it myself, obviously, because my memories don't go that young, but I have heard this.
And so at a young age, did you have any concept of what you wanted to do or what your thoughts were of the future?
Interesting. I loved writing and reading above all else for my life, but I was not necessarily encouraged to go into that field. Both of my parents were academics, as I mentioned. My mom eventually became president of a couple of universities. She was actually the first Black woman to be president of a major research university in the country. It was the University of Houston. And, she used to say to me, because I used to talk about, writing, not necessarily creative writing. I was talking about journalism for a while. I was just trying to figure out where my place in this writing, world would be. And I was not encouraged to do that because she felt that it wasn't really a stable field. There was like a triangular field with everybody at the bottom and just a few people at the top. And she was concerned for me. If I had wanted to become an English professor, that might have been better. It's like the family scandal. I didn't get a PhD, so that might have been sort of okay. But writing was not something that she really felt confident, that I was going to be able to make the life that I wanted to make. And it was only after, she passed away when I was 22, which is the worst thing that's ever happened to me. My mom was amazing, so I don't want to give any other impression. She was an amazing human being. But it was in that moment, in that devastation, that I was able to get comfortable in my own skin and figure out for myself what I wanted from the world.
What was Dad's opinion about that? Did he share the same worry as your mom?
My dad was less constrained by some of the kind of, how do I say this? Some of the perspectives that my mom had, because my mom is, I'm Black, my mom is Black, and my dad is white. And so from my mom's perspective, she was really interested in me having a stable career, something that would enable me to have a good life, enable me to make enough money, enable me to have a family, all the things that, that are not a foregone conclusion for African Americans in this country. My dad, had a very evolved perspective, around a lot of things, but he didn't have that kind of, real sort of organic, fear for the future. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So from his perspective, he was just a little bit more like, do what you want, but I'm my mother's child. I was for many, many years. So I listened to her more.
What would you say the biggest thing was that you learned from your dad?
My dad is brilliant. And I don't say that lightly. I don't say that easily. I mean, he is a fascinating person. And I learned to question from him. He questions everything. And he develops his own thinking on things, which is rare these days. I think most people regurgitate, other people's opinions, but my dad possesses a real ability to analyze and formulate his own opinions, and his recall is amazing. I don't know how. Every time I'm like stumped on something, I call him. He's 84, and I'm like, "Hey, Dad, what was the, blah blah weird random factoid?" He'd be like, "Oh yeah, so blah blah," and I'm like, "Really?" But you can't operate your iPhone. It's pretty fascinating. But anyway. So yes, I learned to question and I learned to analyze. I learned to be a little skeptical. I learned to not immediately respect authority. I think my dad probably gave a little bit of, instilled a little bit of rage against the machine in me.
And that had to have helped you going into different situations and not assuming things in the beginning, but asking more questions and being more curious.
It gave me a lot of curiosity, and it gave me an ability not just to accept things at face value, but to really want to probe a little further to understand, whether I actually believed in this thing, whether I actually respected this thing or this person. So I'm grateful to him for that, although there are times in this life and in this society when it is much easier to be able to take things at face value and have faith in things, to sort of have faith. I wish I could just have faith in the way that some people seem to.
Can you think of an example of that?
When my mother died, I had a lot of very well-meaning, very lovely people tell me that she's in a better place, and that I would be seeing her eventually. And I wish I could just believe that. I do.
Yeah, me too. That's a hard one.
Right.
It's interesting. When my grandfather died, I had somebody who worked for me that was Mormon, and he wrote me this really sweet letter that I would see my grandfather again. And I called him in my office, and I was like, pretty sure my grandpa didn't go to heaven. He didn't believe. And he goes, no, what we believe is that you can pray your relatives up to heaven. And I was like, oh, wow, I hadn't heard of that. Like, I was raised in a Christian household, but I hadn't heard. It's like
pray
all
up.
all the different options.
And how much prayer does that take exactly?
Yeah, how do I do
what
that?
are we talking about here?
Yeah.
Is it nightly? Is it how long? Like, what do we?
So you can almost just find the thing you want.
Right.
Find the beliefs you want if you look long enough.
Right, exactly.
But, you won't really ever know until you're dead. And then
you shuffle off this mortal coil.
Yeah.
Right.
You can't come back and tell yourself.
Right.
It's funny.
Yeah. Psst. Pray every night for 4.5 minutes and you're going to pray your mom, who knew?
So how do you end up in France? And how old are you?
How old was I in France? So I went to a French school when I was in Maryland, and my mom and my dad were going through a divorce. And my mom, who was at the time chair of the political science department at Howard, but she didn't have a ton of money. They were trying to figure out their finances in this divorce. And she found this incredible public school. I think it was actually a system, of multiple schools in Maryland that still exist, that is bilingual, that does immersive instruction. And so she enrolled me in French school when I was, I think, 5 or 6 years old. And I was very fortunate. I had a Parisian, actually, teacher, Madame Francis. And my entire instruction, was in French. And so I was in that school from kindergarten, I think, through to 11th, no, not 11th grade, until 6th grade. And that, I was fluent in French when I came out of there.
It's like the perfect age because you can learn as many languages as you want at that age.
Right,
Isn't
exactly.
it funny?
It was amazing. You're such a sponge,
Yeah.
and I really came out of that fluent. I lost a little bit of it because I went into an English-speaking school because we moved, one of the moves, actually we moved from Maryland to New York. And I went to an English-speaking school. And then I went into the United Nations International School for high school. And even though it wasn't fully immersive, they did have, obviously because I had so many native speakers, I had very high-level French instruction. So that kind of helped me. And that was when I went to France for the first time. I lived in Saint-Malo for 2 summers while I was at UNIS, United Nations School, as part of one of their exchange programs. So that was my first experience living in France.
What was that like? Like, was that scary? Being away from your parents? And No, you liked it?
Yeah.
So how old were you?
I was 14.
14?
When I went the first time.
And are you living with another family?
I was living with a family. And actually it was hilarious. I mean, this is a different time, but I went, I flew by myself to England. A family friend met me and we went to wherever he was living in somewhere outside of London. And then, it was a time when I was like really into ska and like really into like, punk rock, whatever. And I was like, I have to go see King's Road. And he was like, well, have at it. So I found the bus and I got myself on the bus and I took myself to King's Road and I walked up and down King's Road and bought some neon shit. Like got back and, took the bus back to his house. I don't remember where it was, but it wasn't in London. And then went to the ferry, I guess. It was some ferry across, I can't remember what channel it was, obviously, but it was, I took the ferry by myself, to France. And I guess obviously somebody met me, but this was all, I'm 14,
And there's no cell phones.
No, there's no cell phones. It's like, good luck, bon voyage, and it was incredible. I felt very, maybe all the moves and the kind of way I had grown up, kind of prepared me for being independent in that way. And then I was in France and it was incredible. Saint-Malo is a small city surrounded by, it's on the ocean, surrounded by high walls, and you can get around by bike, and there was a little kind of crew of us and we would all just take our bikes and like, like roll around Saint-Malo and get Café Liégeois. And I met a little boyfriend. My French family actually taught me to smoke also.
What?
I swear to God, this was, because I didn't smoke. I'm like, they were like, oh, you have to learn. And so they,
it's
gave
good
me,
for you.
Literally, they were like, here's how you light the cigarette. I'm like, okay. This is crazy.
Did that become a habit?
Yes and no. I don't have, I am no prude, but I don't have the most addictive personality. And so, yeah, I smoked on and off. Like I was a social smoker for a bunch of years. I'd be out like in, France, like having a smoke and like, in bars and, in New York City, in the 90s, whatever. But, at most it was like, hanging out at the club smoking, but then at some point I gave the whole thing up because it wasn't that interesting.
One of the funniest things I've ever seen over there is somebody kind of running along the beach and then they stop and they have a fanny pack and then they pull out a cigarette and start smoking. And they're like gorgeous, like,
But they live longer than us. So, what does that tell you?
Well, do it
Not
after.
like I'm advocating for smoking. I gave it up a long time ago.
But smoke after you run.
Yeah,
the
hey,
secret.
Listen, who doesn't need a cig after you've exerted yourself like that?
Any kind of like things you missed about the United States when you were there? Any cultural shocks?
No.
No?
I love France.
You were just very adaptive?
Yeah, I love it over there. When I was in college, I lived in France. I lived in Paris specifically, and feel extremely comfortable there. It's interesting. Over this past year and a half, I guess I would say, I have worked from France for about 3 months, and I recognize that it is somehow very much of like a spiritual home for me. I feel very comfortable in Paris. I feel more comfortable in Paris than I do in Los Angeles. So I don't know. I'm hoping to eventually structure a life where I live half my time there.
What's the best city in the world?
Paris. And I love New York. I'm sorry. I know I should say New York because it's my home, but I would say Paris.
Yeah, it's a popular opinion. So then how does this come into your life?
Oh my gosh, these books,
Is this your original copy?
I'm going to be honest with you, it isn't, but this is the version that I read in English. So I did painstakingly find the specific version that I read, and I do have this exact version. It's just I couldn't find it on my bookshelves. It is in my attic in a box, but I know that I have a slightly more worn version of this exact a more worn copy of this exact version. I started to read the Claudine books when I was in high school. And I actually first read them in French, which was incredible, and kind of life-changing because it really started to get me into French literature, which I hadn't really been up to that point. I mean, I was a bookworm, but I was really reading in English even when I was in French school. But these books started to really warm me to reading literature in French.
How is it different experiencing it in French versus English?
The translation is lovely, but I like the way the French structure their sentences, and it felt in French more like a consciousness I could step into. It felt a little more, I mean, obviously grounded. It's, the language in which the books were written. And so, there was a lyricism to it that you still find in the English translation, but in French, it's just you are steeped in it aesthetically as well as linguistically somehow.
So do you know, did somebody introduce it to you, or how did you come about?
That's a really good question. I really don't know. It may have been a class. I may have been assigned to read, the Claudine à l'école books in a class, and then was like, and just read the rest on my own. That may have been it. I don't recall, but I'm grateful to whomever introduced me.
So kind of explain the series and the book for the audience. Like, what is it about?
Colette is a really interesting woman who was writing in the 1800s, I think. And that's when these books are set. And there are 4 of them. And it's about a sort of plucky, really smart young lady named Claudine. And Claudine is just a character that I love. She is very unapologetic. She is, and this is, written during a time when women were expected to move along a very particular, and prescribed path, where they were expected to, get married and have a domestic life. And that was the future that one could hope for as a woman. And Claudine was rebellious. She was very interested in her own independent thoughts. The interiority in these books is incredible, because you get this sense of how she's thinking about the world and how anomalous it is, for the time. And so, the book starts out with Claudine at school, where she's coming into her own and really understanding, who she is as a thinker. And then it goes into Claudine in Paris, where she moves to Paris and starts to really question, what it is that she wants in life, and whether she likes Paris, whether she, how she wants to be an independent woman. And then the next book is, Claudine married. And she enters into a marriage that is at first hopeful and then ultimately disappointing. And she's able to eventually leave this marriage, without judgment. And this is at a time when women did not leave marriages like that, but she finds her way out of this marriage in a way that doesn't damage her self-esteem. And then the last book is where she enters into a friendship, and she finds herself this independent woman, and what that life is like for her. And these are very inspirational stories for any woman at any point in time. But certainly when you kind of understand that Claudine is really that's what I'm looking for. These books are like a roman à clef for Colette, the writer. And so when you understand that they're really based on her actual life, it just becomes even more inspirational to really to process how much she moved against the tides in a time that was difficult to do so.
And is there an overarching kind of lesson or message?
The message is about finding your voice and being independent and being unapologetic about your intelligence and questioning things, and constructing the life that you want for yourself. This was, for me, these were deeply important messages and themes to explore at a young age.
Yeah, because most people don't think that they can create their own outcomes, right?
Right, exactly. And it took a while for some of I definitely absorbed these messages at a young age, and started thinking about, my life in a different way, and my intelligence in a different way, and my goals in a different way. But, as I became an adult and really got comfortable in my own skin, and really processed that I wanted to create the life that I wanted, not that other people told me that I should want, that's when I kind of turned back to these books and I was like, oh, that's right. You know?
Do you remember meeting any resistance from that?
Not as an adult, you know, when it was when I understood that about my life and how I wanted to move through my life, it was very definitive for me. It was a very specific moment. It was it was one of the more religious moments I've had in my life. You know, I'll never forget it. You know, it was after my mom had passed away, maybe, I don't know, 6 months, a year afterward, and I was wandering around my room, devastated, depressed, and I came upon this framed picture of me and my mom sitting together. We were in India, you know, sitting together on a log, and I looked at this picture, and I had this revelatory moment that she wasn't coming to save me, you know, which seems rather obvious as she was dead. But, you know, in that moment, I was like, I had this moment of like, oh my God, my mom isn't coming to save me from this misery. She's not coming to save me. And it was this sort of terror. You know, I was like, nobody's coming to save me, actually. Nobody is coming to save me from this. And there was this terror that sort of ran through my body. And then immediately, like this other thing came up. You know, I say it like that because that's what it felt like. It was like terror and then empowerment. And then I was like, well, wait a minute. If nobody's coming to save me, then that I'm saving myself, then this is my life and it's nobody else's life. Nobody else can live this for me. It is my life and mine alone. And it was the most deeply empowering moment of my adult life. Like all of a sudden I was like, this is my life. And in that moment, it was like a philosophical 180 for me. It shifted everything about how I think about the world, how I think about myself in the world, and how I wanted to approach creating this life that I wanted. And so no, I did not receive any resistance to that because I was so absolutely determined in that moment to live the life that I envisioned for myself.
What specifically were those things that you envisioned for yourself?
Well, the first thing was getting out of the job I was in. I was working in finance, and I was like, well, this sucks. Look at me. So the very first thing I envisioned was not working in finance. So I quit that.
Were you doing that because of your mom? Like she would be proud of that?
I kind of was. I mean, you know, she passed away after I graduated from college, maybe like, you know, 9 months after I graduated, maybe. And you know, when I graduated from college, you know, I got this very fancy job as an analyst on Wall Street. It was very competitive, difficult to get. And my intention at the time was to work that job for 2 years because it was a 2-year corporate analyst program, apply to law school, and then go to law school, you know, because law school was like the sort of repository for liberal arts, smart people who don't really know what they want in life, right? So that was the path that I was on, and I did not like it at all. You know, I was working on Wall Street at a time, I'm going to age myself here a little bit, but at a time when women were not allowed to wear pants, and we had to, not only were we not allowed to wear pants, but we had to wear hose with our skirts. You know, so the very first, you know, thing that I envisioned for myself was not doing that anymore. And I quit that job and I took off those hose and I got a tattoo on my ankle and I was like, never again.
What's the tattoo?
It's actually the sun. It's a sun from the inside of my mother's favorite scarf.
Oh, wow. Mm. That's cool. So it probably always reminds you of that a little bit, right?
Yes, exactly.
So you decide I'm not doing that. I'm going to do something I want to do. And then what are the steps you take?
Well, I you know, had a very kind of circuitous path to my goals. I actually, when I left my job on Wall Street, I thought for a while I wanted to work in fashion. And so I got a certificate in fashion merchandising from Parisian School of Design. and then became an assistant buyer for Lord and Taylor, then a department store in New York City. And I realized after about a year, this, it's one thing to, like clothes. It's a whole other thing to work in fashion, and it was too narrow for me. I couldn't do it, and so I left that job, and I actually at that point was like, okay, I want to write. This is the thing that I love the most in the world, and this is what I want to do. And so I moved to Ireland, and I studied writing at UCD, University College Dublin, for a year. And while I was there, I put together a portfolio to apply to graduate school. And I got into Columbia's MFA program in creative writing, and came back and I was like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to write the great American novel. Like, this is my goal. And then while I was in grad school, I needed to, eat and have shelter over my head. And so I was like, what am I going to do? And so I leveraged my experience in fashion to working for a kind of fledgling fashion magazine. And that ended up starting a career in media. When I won a fiction award for a short story that I wrote while I was in grad school, and the person who presented it to me was the then editor-in-chief of Essence magazine. And when I graduated my MFA program, she offered me a job as the fashion and beauty features editor of Essence. And that started me on a 20-year career in media that I am very, 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 very proud of. And I was able to write a nonfiction advice book for women during that time. But I put my creative writing largely aside because I didn't have the mental space to do it. And so now my debut novel is a return to a dream that I had in my 20s.
That's fun. Do you ever find yourself giving advice to people who are kind of stuck in the thing that they think they're supposed to do versus the thing that would be what they should do?
So much of the time, yes. I love mentoring women. I big sis women all the time, and I love it. And I speak to and men too. I mean, women, I guess, more gravitate toward my messaging. But I've mentored a lot of different people who are living a life that is not for them. That where they're following somebody else's advice or moving along a path that was set out for them, as opposed to a path that they created for themselves. And the question is, how do you get comfortable in your own skin, and take the risks that you need to take in order to have the life that you want? And that's a whole nother sort of separate lesson about fear, because I personally believe that fear equals growth, that you can't possibly become the person that you are meant to become if you don't make yourself uncomfortable, if you're not afraid. If you stay within your comfort zone, you can't possibly technically become everything that you could be in this life. And so I talk to people a lot about not just living a life that they envision for themselves, but also taking risks and understanding that it's in that discomfort, it's in that fear that you are growing and expanding into this greater person.
Is there like a key that unlocks that and gives them permission?
For me, it was when I got comfy in my own skin. And what that meant for me was that I processed that, no one was going to love me like I love myself, which is a bit of a trite thing to say, but how I interpreted that was that I had better love all of me, not just the parts that I really like, but all of me, that's physically, intellectually, just everything about myself I had better love, because you can't sort of cherry pick the things that you love about yourself. It doesn't work that way. And when you get to that point where you're like, that's true, I'm comfy in my own skin, that's, for me, what gave me the permission to really start taking risks and pushing outside of, what were the boundaries and parameters that had been set up for me.
That's beautiful. But so many people struggle with that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of times we try to please others and we lose track of what we're good at or where we should be or where we can contribute the most.
That's exactly right. It really helps to understand, who you want to be in this world, not just what you want to do, but how you want to contribute, like what is it that you're meant to be giving back to the universe? How can you productively exist in these spaces in a way that makes the world, the universe better once you leave?
Yeah. Can we go through some of this book?
Okay. Some of this book. Oh, okay. Who's got
little highlights? So, I mean, it is kind of interesting, too, because she's talking about growing up with a sense of fitting into expectations, right?
Right, exactly.
Okay, let's go to the first part. I found that first tab pretty interesting.
Ooh. Colette has always been admirable for reasons that have nothing to do with political correctness. Me, a feminist, she scoffed in a 1910 interview. I'll tell you what the suffragettes deserve: the whip and the harem. She saw no contradiction between supporting conservative positions and living her life as an erotic militant in revolt against them. Better worlds and just rewards were of no more consequence to her than the prospect of an afterlife. Preferring passion to goodness, she seduced her teenage stepson and neglected her only child. The paradoxes of great literature are those of human nature, and Colette is nothing if not human.
Very punk rock.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, she raged against the machine, I love the fact that the paradoxes of great literature are those of human nature, and Colette is nothing if not human. I mean, she was certainly a person who had many admirable qualities, who was very controversial, who lived a life, without boundaries, and wrote about a lot of that in her books.
Do you want to look through some of those tabs and see if any of them resonate with you?
Age, corpulence, and unremitting pain. Geez, did we have to go corpulence? That seems unkind. Oh, I like this one. Tomorrow will be Sunday, no school. What a bore. It's the only place I find amusing. Speaking to the sort of intellectual qualities of Claudine. I like that. Let me keep going. This is a funny line, and maybe a little bit how I feel about math too. Odious suppositions, improbable hypotheses that have made me refractory to arithmetic for the rest of my life. That's hilarious.
Were you good at math?
I didn't love it, so I didn't do that well in school at it. But actually, weirdly, on my SATs, I got the exact same score in math and in English, but I didn't like it, so I didn't put any time into it. So no, I was not a good math student. Maybe I could have been if I gave a crap.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. I had a teacher when I was young tell me that I was good at math. So then I just tried harder at it, and I probably wasn't good at it. But because an adult made me feel like I was, I worked harder.
Right.
And thought I was.
Right.
And if you think you are, kind of.
That's you rise to meet expectations. It's an interesting thing in life. And nobody ever told me, hey, you're good at math. So I never thought that I was. And I was like, I don't like it.
What about page 182?
Yeah, can I read it? Should I read it? Now for the wreath. Ah, how well it suited me. A little Ophelia, hardly more than a child, with those amusing dark shadows round the eyes. Yes, they used to tell me when I was little that I had a grown-up person's eyes. Later, it was eyes that were not quite respectable. You can't please everyone, and yourself as well. I prefer to please myself first of all. So emblematic of the greater themes of this book, and how she kind of existed. She was precocious, right? So this when she was little, people said that she had a grown-up person's eyes. She was observant. She was skeptical. She was questioning. She was independent, profoundly. And later was eyes that were not quite respectable, right? Because that's how people judged her. They judged, this sort of plucky young woman in that way because she was all of those things, right? And then when she says she prefers to please herself, please myself first of all, I that resonates with me absolutely because, I think that that's not a selfish attitude. I think that it is the way that you live the life you're meant to live.
Yeah, it's interesting how much of an effect that had on you.
Really, it was. I mean, it's, to this day, it's very core to my personal philosophy and how I choose to walk through the world.
Yeah. Okay, so then the big question is, how did Colette change your life?
The complete Claudine, the 4 different books, they changed my life because when I was first reading them, I was a bit between cultures myself. I had gone to French school. I was in an international school. I was Black, but my dad was white. I was in New York City, kind of getting used to being in that environment. And I was trying to figure out who I was, against all of these, seeming contradictions. And challenging circumstances in which I had to acclimate also as an awkward teenager. And when I read these books, it gave me permission, to follow my own dreams and to be independent and to, kind of be this anomalous young woman who didn't quite fit into anybody's box, and to not be a stereotypical anything. It really gave me permission to do that. And that kind of permission followed me throughout my life, through to my career in journalism and now my career as a writer, where I find it very important to tell stories of unapologetic women who are living the lives that they devise for themselves. And I'm deeply grateful, to this book for sowing the seeds for that philosophy.
Yeah, that's amazing. Creating your own outcome, right?
Exactly right.
Not living somebody else's life.
That is exactly correct.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about If I Ruled the World. And my first question was, don't you rule the world? Did you ever consider I Rule the World as the title?
No, I never considered that. I never thought about it that way. That's so funny though. Don't I rule the world? Interesting. I mean, I don't know. I guess I don't know. Rule is a funny word though. Do I exist in a world that is of my own making? Absolutely. Do I think that I rule it? Probably not. But that title is meaningful to me, especially because it was not the first title of my debut novel. When I was first writing it, and then when I picked it back up again years later, the title was Sugar, which is the name of the magazine that my protagonist eventually edits. And I liked that title because I felt it had like double meanings, and I felt that it was also sort of a dog whistle to a particular audience. But then as I was getting closer, I was going through the edits and getting closer to publication, and I realized that it didn't fully reflect the vibe of the book and the journey of my protagonist. And I wanted something that was, more about what, my Nikki Rose, my protagonist, is going through. And also, it's a song title of a song that it was incredibly popular. It is still one of the best, endemic songs of hip hop by Nas. And, it was very popular, rose to popularity during the era in which my book is set. And then Lauryn Hill is on the song If I Ruled the World. And that's a little bit of an if you know, you know moment, because she was actually the very first cover subject of Honey magazine, which is a magazine where I first became an editor-in-chief and somewhat inspires the magazine Sugar that my protagonist eventually edits.
How long have you had the idea for this book?
I began this book when I was editor-in-chief of Teen People, and this is back in my 30s. And I wrote about 100 pages back then. And I initially saw the journey of my protagonist as she became editor-in-chief of Sugar and what that was like. But I put the book down for over a decade, for about 15 years almost. And I picked it up, every now and then. I would, look at it, read it every now and then. But I put it down for a long time, in part because, I was in a profession where I didn't have the mental space to really work on it, but in part because the story, while I loved that part of her journey, it didn't feel urgent to me. And it was years later when I realized it wasn't just the story of a smart young woman becoming editor-in-chief of a magazine, but it was the story of somebody who was coming into her own voice and who is dealing with some real challenges, of that era. She was contending with misogyny. She was contending with sexual violence, and she was dealing with the complexities of being an ambitious woman in industries that doesn't necessarily support that. And that became, when I really understood those were the themes of the book, then I was like, oh my gosh, it became more urgent and I had to pick it back up and finish it.
How much of it is autobiographical?
None of it. I know, it's interesting. I'm going to get this question so much, and I'm stealing myself for everybody who's like, this is your story. But it's actually not my story. I did pull like maybe 4 small kind of anecdotes from my real life, and I put them in there as little moments in the book. But the journey of my protagonist is not my journey. For example, when we meet her, she is an editor at a high-end fashion magazine, and she goes from that to becoming the editor-in-chief of Sugar magazine. I actually went from working as a fashion and beauty editor at Essence magazine, which is a very, very different environment than Stylist, the magazine where Nikki is working when we meet her. Even though it is set in a world that I know better than almost anyone, and there are some similarities between myself and the protagonist, her particular journey and what she goes through as she learns how to be a great editor-in-chief, none of those specific incidences happened to me.
It paints a pretty vivid picture of New York in the 90s. How important was that, and why did you feel that needed to be done that way?
I love that era. It's an era when I really cut my teeth, as a woman, as a journalist, as an editor-in-chief. And I don't think there are that many portrayals, actually, certainly in fiction, of that particular era. There's really very few, and certainly not from the perspective of a woman who is in a position of relative power. And I wanted to offer a behind the scenes peek at this one of the most culturally important, moments, of our history in this country. And I also wanted people to see what it was like to be a woman moving through culturally influential spaces during that era.
Yeah, it's funny that unless you live in New York, you don't understand how much New York sets the tone for the world in a lot of things.
Exactly right. And
it's a huge pipe of culture and publishing, fashion, so much of it is either coming from there or consumed there and made popular there.
That's exactly right. And this particular era was one in which hip hop culture, hip hop music ruled mainstream culture. I mean, mainstream culture and hip hop culture were basically indistinguishable at that moment. You had, a lot of, models walking runways and big dookie chains and do-rags, and, it was music executives that were kind of running the social scene. And you had, everybody in New York City who worked in, I don't know, everybody from, finance to fashion to all sorts of industries, really vying to get into these hip hop music, parties. And, it was just this heady time. Because we knew that we were creating something huge, and we were watching the culture being exported internationally. And New York always, exports culture internationally, but that particular moment the music and this sort of newish culture that was being exported was so powerful, and to be in the center of that was something.
How would you explain Nikki's evolution in the book?
She goes. I mean, Nikki, I love my protagonist. She is messy. We're gonna watch her make so many mistakes along her journey, which is really important. But I feel like she's ultimately very inspirational because when we meet her, she is insecure and she's a bit of an ingenue, and she is trying to find her way and her voice, and she's got these big ambitions, but she doesn't really know how to exist with confidence in her own skin. And so we watch her as she goes from being this sort of more innocent but ambitious young woman into finding her voice and coming into her power. It's not a coming of age story because she's an adult when we meet her, but it's a coming of power story. And so we see her ultimately find her voice, and that's when everything pulls together for her.
Won't it be interesting someday if I have somebody on here and this is the book that changed their life?
Oh my God, that'd be amazing.
It would be, wouldn't it? Can we go through some sections here?
Sure.
So same thing, just highlighted.
Yes. Out on the street, Lucinda paused. She didn't look up as she took a small silver case out of her bag, pulled out a cigarette, lit it, then blew a long stream of smoke into the crisp evening air. For a second, it seemed as if she might be contemplating my idea. Then she took another hard drag, exhaled practically into my face, and said with finality, "Black girls don't sell magazines." Now, remember I mentioned to you that there were 4 sort of small moments from my life. I say 4, but maybe 3 to 5 small moments from my life that I put into the book. This is one of them. This actually happened to me. This was somebody that I was working for, actually at that fledgling magazine where I first became an editor, where I was working when I was in grad school. And I was proposing putting somebody Black on the cover. And it was actually a gentleman who said this. It was an Italian man who owned this magazine. And I will never forget, we were in his office, not on the street. But he was smoking in his office, totally illegal. He didn't give a shit. And he was like, "Amy, Black girls don't sell magazines." And so that stuck with me, and I put it into my novel.
Did your dad's challenging of authority kick in? Or how did you feel in that moment?
I felt utterly dismissed. But I wasn't yet at a point in my life where I felt confident enough to combat it. I mean, I said words, but I didn't say the things that I would say, with 15, 20 years plus of experience after that.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask is how would you handle that if it happened today? And it probably wouldn't happen today just because nobody would talk to you that way. But if it did, how would you handle it?
I don't know. We are in an era in which, people feel very comfortable saying all sorts of things. So increasingly, I am thinking that we might be returning to a moment when people look at you in your face, blow smoke at it and tell you, "Oh, Black girls don't sell magazines." I think that today I would talk about cultural influence, and I would talk about the way in which Black people, Black women in particular, rally around causes and products, and the fact that when I want to say it was Vogue, when they did, I think it was Vogue, or maybe it was Elle, I'm not sure, but when they did an issue highlighting all Black models, and it just sold out completely. So I would just cite a bunch of these things, to sort of calmly combat this. And that's what I'm telling you, I would say. But the reality of what I would actually say is probably just a little bit more purple.
Yeah. Page 35. I love this part because it's one of the things I think I've learned is that it's better to win than be right.
Oh, yes, I like this moment. Pausing in the doorway, Joseph turned and said, "I told you what I like and how I'd like to see you. Either you can continue to be right all by yourself, Or you can consider the possibility that not everyone around you is wrong all of the time. I love this moment. This is when my protagonist, Nikki's boyfriend at the time, Joseph, is talking to her about sort of her intractability, and the fact that she's sort of, inflexible and defensive in this moment. And so he's telling her about herself a little bit, in a way that she can't necessarily hear at that time, but I would like to think that she absorbs.
I love that part. Page 104, and I'm asking, is this another autobiographical moment?
Should I read it first? I know my start in journalism was inauspicious at best, I acknowledged, seeing her eyes crinkle at my use of one of her favorite words. One thing my mother and I shared was a love of beautiful language. No. This is not an autobiographical moment. By the time I started working in journalism, my mother had already passed away. When she passed away, I was still working in finance. So some of this book is, my imagining of this character, the mother character is not really like my mother, particularly. Some small aspects of her are, but there is some imagining of what it might feel like if an extreme, partial version of my mother were reacting to me going into journalism.
Okay, page 125. And you mentioned this album twice in the book.
Yeah.
And it's one of the greatest albums ever, but most people don't know about the album.
So shall I read it first?
Yeah.
By the time I cracked open a bottle of Pinot Noir on Sunday night and popped Massive Attack's Mezzanine into my stereo, I had produced a declaration of editorial independence into which I had infused every ounce of passion I had for Sugar's audience, for my career as an editor, and for the opportunity to create a space where I belonged. I mention music a lot in this book, and one thing I will say is that my protagonist Nikki's musical taste does reflect my own. I have very broad musical taste, and I thought it was important that she, as somebody who very much identifies as being Black, very much knows she's a Black woman, is organically comfortable in all of those spaces, but that she also represents something that is outside of a stereotypical box. And so that's why I mentioned her love of Led Zeppelin, which is my favorite band ever. I mentioned her love of, I don't know if I say Pink Floyd, but I talk about, all of these various musical genres that may not be sort of stereotypically Black, but were, again, interesting to me to flesh out a character of somebody who is anomalous to a certain extent, but still is very, very comfortably Black.
So later on in the book, you talk about Mezzanine as a top 10 desert island album.
Yes.
What are your top 5 desert albums? Is Mezzanine on there?
Is Mezzanine on there? Yeah, actually, I guess Mezzanine will probably be on there as I think about it. It's probably my favorite sort of trip-hop album, if you will. I would definitely put, Hendrix on there, Band of Gypsies. I would put... I probably list some of these in the book, but I would put Stevie Wonder on there. Mine would probably be Hotter Than July. I would add probably like Arrested Development or, Tribe Called Quest or something, one of their albums on there. There's so many albums I could probably Bob Marley,
Which one?
I don't know, actually. Probably like something sort of like, I don't know, mid-late career. I'm blanking on the actual album names. I'm not excellent at album and song titles, actually. But probably something like mid-late. I used to DJ classic reggae when I was in college. So I do have a lot of classic reggae in my library. I'm just again blanking on the album title, and a lot more hip hop in there. Probably some Biggie. probably some Nas, probably some Queen Latifah, probably some MC Light,
It's fun. Okay, let's go to page 237.
Okay. You guys have no idea how completely absurd it is to be me right now. If I'm too aggressive, I'm an asshole. If I'm too submissive, I'm a doormat. If I'm at the office too much, I'm a workaholic. If I'm at the club, I'm a party girl. If I grow the business, I'm a sellout. If I protect my readers and ignore the business, sugar might go away. I put on my sunglasses to hide my damp eyes. Am I a slut or a boss or a bookworm or somebody's bitch? Honestly, I have no fucking idea, and I don't know what you all want from me.
That's incredible writing. Like
you.
what you do in that little passage is insane.
I appreciate that. This was such a moment of desperation and revelation, for my protagonist, who is at this point in the book hitting an all-time low. And she is being pulled in all sorts of directions. And I wanted to reflect how it felt, to have everybody expecting something from her and to have her not know how to satisfy everybody and being sort of miserable in that space at the same time as she's really trying to make something happen for herself and for Sugar Magazine.
Yeah, that's great writing. Very, very powerful. Let's go to 274.
This is the desert island section?
No, convictions.
Oh, no, 274. Here we go. Wait a minute, that was 269. Your convictions mean nothing if you can't maintain them in all areas of your life. And I will try to do better. Love, Nikki. A narrative device, I guess, that I use throughout the book is Nikki's editor's letter, which she calls Nikki's notes. And it's something that she kind of reinvents. She reinvents the traditional editor's letter for Sugar Magazine. And instead of doing the normal editor's letter where she's like, oh, on page 55, there's a great fashion story. On page 26, there's a great beauty story. She chooses to use that page to write about her own life experiences and her own reflections. And, we get a lot of interiority here. We get a lot of her, how she's experiencing what's happening to her, in the world. And in this moment, she is reflecting on how she is choosing to defend her vision and, defend her readers. And she's regretful of the fact that she didn't defend her friends, in a moment that was important. And she's recognizing the fact that she wants to walk her talk and she wants to be somebody who does what she says she's going to do. And that's what she's talking about here when in this editor's letter. She's talking about how her convictions are meaningless if she doesn't maintain them all areas of her life. And she's apologizing to her friends for not having the clarity of conviction to defend them in an important moment.
What are some convictions that you fight for in your life?
I am somebody who doesn't tolerate any phobias or isms relating to any community, whether that's racism, homophobia, Islamophobia, sexism, discrimination against trans people. I don't do that. I will not. I cannot. And so anytime that I hear somebody talking about any group of any underserved community in a way that is discriminatory, I will pipe up immediately. Damn the consequences.
It's great. Well, amazing. I hope the book sells a ton.
I am so proud of this novel, in part because I love the way it's written. I was very intentional about making sure that it was a fun and juicy page turner, but that it also addressed very serious issues that I think are important, and I'm proud of the fact that, people will come out of reading this book, hopefully very inspired, but also having an understanding of what this era was like for women. That underneath the fun and the sexy glamour, there was a lot of danger, and it was a very perilous time to be an ambitious woman, specifically an ambitious Black woman. And I really love the fact that I was able to weave these important themes throughout the book while still making it a super, super fun read. So I can't wait for this book to be out there in the world. And I'm excited for people to meet my protagonist, Nikki, and to watch her on this really messy journey, but then come out at the end feeling inspired.
It's fun. Do you feel a little vulnerable in this between time before it's out?
Oh, totally. Yes, I really do. I mean, I know it's a good book, and I am thrilled for people to read it. But I also know that it is the kind of book that could invite some haters, because it is a very specific peek behind the scenes of a very important cultural era. And so there will be some people, I imagine, who might be like, oh, it didn't happen that way, or this is not what this particular thing looked like, or this isn't how people talked. And, I think that knowing that authenticity is so incredibly important to this culture, I know that I captured it, but I really hope that everybody sees it that way, and I'm a little nervous about that. And also, I'm stealing myself for everybody who's like, "Oh, it's your story," because I read about some gnarly shit in here. So I'm like, "Oh my God," I'm stealing myself for that as well.
I mean, I love that moment between like where it's coming out, but then when it comes out, it's not really yours anymore.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, exactly.
Because people are going to impose their own interpretation on it, and so.
That's exactly
This
right.
is probably the most purest moment right now.
I know. It's coming out in under 2 weeks.
It's
under
a different
2
dance.
weeks.
Well, good job. Thank you.
Thank you.
We are so excited to announce the Books That Changed My Life website. We made a way for you to show your book pride and that you love books. Hats, tees, hoodies. Check it out. Link in the description. Everybody needs a self-help hat.